You've cried at a film, at a song, at nothing in particular on a Tuesday afternoon. Every other species on Earth produces tears. Not one of them does what you just did, and nobody fully understands why you can. Start with what a tear actually is, because most people have never thought about it. Your eyes produce three distinct types. The first is basal tears, a thin, continuous film that keeps the surface of your eye lubricated every moment you're awake. Without them, your cornea would dry out and you would go blind within hours. The second type is reflex tears. These are produced in response to irritants, smoke, onions, a speck of dust. They flush the eye clean and serve an obvious mechanical purpose. Every vertebrate on the planet produces both of these. Fish produce them, reptiles produce them, birds produce them. The eye is an ancient piece of biological machinery, and it needs constant maintenance regardless of what species is running it. The third type is the one that separates us. Psychic tears, sometimes called emotional tears, are produced not by the eye needing maintenance, but by the brain sending a signal. And they are chemically different from the other two. Emotional tears contain higher concentrations of stress hormones, prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and leucine and kephalin, as well as higher protein content overall. They are not a malfunction of the reflex system. They are a distinct biological product, built differently, triggered differently, serving a purpose that took scientists over a century to even agree was real. The puzzle isn't just what emotional tears are, it's why they exist at all. From a pure survival standpoint, crying is a catastrophically bad idea. It blurs your vision at exactly the moment you might need to see clearly. It produces sound that attracts attention. It signals distress to everyone around you, including, in the ancient environments where this trait would have had to evolve, predators. If you ran a cold cost-benefit analysis on emotional crying, you would conclude it should have been selected out of the species long before it became universal. And yet, here we are. Every culture on the planet cries. Every human being who has ever lived has cried. Whatever emotional tears are doing, evolution decided it was worth the risk. The first serious theory is the oldest. Charles Darwin, who thought carefully about nearly everything, concluded that emotional crying was simply a useless byproduct of the muscles around the eye contracting during intense emotion. Cry hard enough, he argued, the lacrimal gland gets compressed and leaks. Tears aren't doing anything, they're just spillage. Most researchers today think Darwin was only partially right. The mechanism is partly accurate, but the tears themselves are not simply overflow. They are actively produced, chemically distinct, and released in patterns that don't match pure mechanical spillage. The second theory is about hormones. The biochemist William Frey spent years in the 1980s studying emotional tears and noticed something specific about their chemical content. The stress hormones concentrated in emotional tears, particularly prolactin and adrenocorticotropic hormone, are the same hormones that build up in the body during periods of intense emotional distress. Frey's hypothesis was that crying was literally a form of excretion. The body, under emotional load, dumps stress chemicals the same way it dumps toxins through sweat. Crying, on this theory, isn't a signal. It's a relief valve. It's why you sometimes feel physically lighter after crying hard. You have, in a very literal sense, shed something. The third theory is social. Oren Hassan, an evolutionary biologist at Tel Aviv University, proposed in 2009 that emotional tears evolved specifically as a social bonding signal, and that their key feature isn't the crying itself, but the visibility of it. Tears blur your vision. They impair your ability to fight or run. Producing them in front of another person is, on a biological level, a deliberate act of vulnerability. Hassan's argument is that this is exactly the point. Crying in front of someone is an involuntary signal that cannot easily be faked. It says, I am distressed enough to lower my defenses in front of you. And in a species that depends entirely on social bonds for survival, an honest, unfakeable signal of vulnerability is extraordinarily valuable. It builds trust faster than words can. Then there's the problem the orangutan keeps causing. In 1906, a zoologist named Charles Hose, living in Borneo, documented an orangutan producing tears while trapped and distressed. It was the first serious entry in a debate that has never fully closed. In the decades since, the reports kept coming. Elephants at Amboseli National Park in Kenya have been observed standing motionless over the bodies of dead herd members for hours, producing what rangers and researchers described as tears tracking down their faces. A matriarch named Echo, studied for decades by elephant researcher Cynthia Moss, was documented returning repeatedly to the bones of her dead calf. Whether she was crying in any emotional sense remains scientifically unresolved. What is resolved is that she kept coming back. Captive chimpanzees have produced tears during apparent distress in several documented cases. A chimp named Flint, studied by Jane Goodall at Gombe, stopped eating after his mother's death and died himself within weeks, producing what Goodall described as a grief so total it consumed him physically. No confirmed emotional tears in Flint's case, but the behavior underneath them, the withdrawal, the cessation of eating, the return to the places she had been, looked like something that didn't need a word. Then, in 2022, a team of Japanese researchers published a study in Current Biology that found something more measurable. Dogs reunited with their owners after a period of separation showed significantly increased tear production compared to baseline and compared to reunions with familiar non-owners. The researchers measured the tears directly, using a standardized ophthalmological test. The increase was real and reproducible. The study did not claim the dogs were crying emotionally. The mechanism behind the tear production couldn't be confirmed, but the pattern was there. Something in the reunion was reaching the lacrimal gland. What makes humans different, if the difference holds, almost certainly isn't the tears themselves, it's the cognitive architecture around them. To cry emotionally at a film, at a story about people who don't exist experiencing things that aren't happening, requires a level of self-projection and empathetic imagination that no other species has demonstrated. To cry at a piece of music requires the ability to abstract emotional meaning from organized sound. To cry at nothing in particular on a Tuesday afternoon requires something stranger still. A self that can feel the weight of its own existence without any immediate external trigger. And this is where culture enters the picture, because it complicates everything. How much humans cry, and when and in front of whom, varies enormously across cultures in ways that reveal how deeply the social bonding function is shaped by context. In Japan, men traditionally cry almost exclusively in private. The concept of people crying in public carries social weight that changes the meaning of the act entirely. In many Mediterranean and Latin American cultures, public crying at funerals and ceremonies is expected and even required as proof of emotional sincerity. Northern European Stoic traditions historically treated visible crying as a sign of weakness in adults. Same species, same biological machinery, radically different rules about when the signal is allowed to fire. What this variation reveals is that the tears themselves are only half the story. The other half is the audience. Hassan's social bonding theory predicts exactly this. If tears are primarily a vulnerability signal, then their meaning depends entirely on who is watching and what the cultural rules say that vulnerability means. In cultures where showing weakness is shameful, emotional crying migrates inward into private. In cultures where shared grief is a communal act, it moves outward into ceremony. The biology is constant. The permission to use it changes everything. No other species negotiates these rules. No other species has cultures with different crying norms. No other species appears to cry at stories or music or the passage of time or the specific weight of an afternoon that isn't quite right but you can't explain why. Which is why no other species has been reliably shown to cry for them. You cried at a film once, or a song, or nothing in particular on a Tuesday afternoon. Every other species on Earth produces tears. Not one of them does that. And the reason they can't is the same reason you can read these words and feel something reading them and know exactly which Tuesday afternoon it was.